Welcome to SoberSmash. SoberSmash. Get to the core issues with King Scott and Dr. Joe and get SoberSmashed.
Hey, Dr. Joe, how are you?
I'm good this afternoon. Another beautiful day in sunny South Florida.
Welcome to SoberSmash Radio. I'm King Scott along with Dr. Joe, and welcome everybody out there. We have some great guests today. I think everybody's going to be impressed. Someone I know for many years. John Lehman from FARR is here, along with Michael Edwards. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks.
We're excited to have you here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Welcome, Michael, to sunny South Florida.
Yeah, it's great to be here from not so sunny Sheffield, England. So, yeah, thanks a lot.
Great. Well, you know, John, I know you for many years. You're doing a great thing with your organization, FARR, which is basically an innovator in the industry and something that was well needed. And we're really happy that you took upon that chore to actually build this up and bring this to the public eye that was needed for a long time. I know Dr. Joe and myself have been in the industry for many years, and we see all the changes that are going on, and someone had to do it. So.
Yeah, somebody had to do it, and someone that didn't have an iron in the fire. That because obviously, if you were trying to make money in this industry at the same time that you were holding the industry accountable, it would be very difficult. You make a lot of enemies real quick.
Well, I think this industry in a whole, if you're going into this industry looking to make money, it's the wrong industry for you. You have to go into this industry and have the passion and want to do it. I know Dr. Joe and myself, when we got involved in this industry, we had no idea what the values were that you would make doing something like this. We did it because we wanted to save lives, and that's what it's all about.
Yes, and there are many excellent programs, ethical law-abiding programs that are driven by the same motivation in South Florida, have always been. And so that group is anxious to see this opportunistic predator group removed from our midst as much as anyone else.
Right. Can you tell us a little about your organization?
Yeah, certainly. The FARR is the Florida Association of Recovery Residences. Its first mission, when it was opened up in 2011, was to be the National Alliance for Recovery Residences affiliate in the state of Florida. And NAR, or the National Alliance, had promulgated a set of standards for the operation of recovery residence that actually improved outcomes. Now we consider them to be best practices, but at the time they were promising practices. And so we did that. We attracted a very small group of recovery residence operators during 2011, 12, and 13, probably 50 programs all told, and maybe 100 locations throughout the state that wanted to be recognized as being compliant with those standards. And then there was a number of legislative initiatives that were trying to identify where all the sober homes were located so that municipal governments could apply zoning rules to get rid of them. And we ended up fighting back against that, and we were successful with the help of both the Department of Children and Family Services and FADA up in Tallahassee. And then that led to a focus on how do we integrate the social model of recovery, which is upon which recovery residences are founded, and the medical model of recovery, which is what the outpatient platforms are founded on. So how do you go about integrating that in an effective way? And when we began that process in 2014, we discovered that there were a serious number of operators out in Palm Beach County that were not interested in care at all. They were interested in raping and pillaging insurance companies for urinalysis fraud. And somehow we became the watchdog. in the absence of anyone else being that watchdog, and that led to a relationship with the Department of Insurance Fraud in Florida, and then later to a relationship with the FBI, and that led to some pretty notable raids.
I have to think that they were grateful to you, John, and FARR and NAR for helping them, because they don't have the resource or the manpower to really do some investigation. And once you started uncovering some of the things that were going on, I think they were then able to come in and knew what they were doing, knew what they were looking for, and started cleaning the house, so to speak.
Certainly, that was part of it. We are not a law enforcement agency and have no, aspirations to become one. But what we did is we were able to field grievances and allegations that were being made by the public, whether they were residents of a sober home or they were clients of a treatment center, or former employees or current employees of either. And forward that information on to the authorities that had the ability to do something about it. Recently, I think everybody here is aware that the legislature last session appropriated $275,000 for the state attorney's office in Palm Beach County to investigate the substance use treatment industry. Now, the political partners up there said, well, who cares about substance use treatment? We'll call it the Sober Home Task Force. But it's working, and they're doing, and regardless of what they named it and what the reasons for naming it, what they did, they are, in fact, taking the action that we have been asking them to take for quite a while. So we're dealing with the patient brokering issue.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your work on the state and national level, because you really brought attention to it and were able to arm the government agencies to do their jobs. So we really appreciate all the work you've done, especially here in South Florida.
Thank you.
Now, Michael, how did you end up in England? You're a guy from Savannah, Georgia,
Yep,
correct?
That's right, yeah.
So what made you go across the pond?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to keep it brief. But prior to going over to Sheffield Hallam and joining the Department of Law and Criminology, which is where our research that we're doing now is based. It's based out of the Department of Law and Criminology, and specifically the Helena Kennedy Center for International Justice. And I'll speak to you about that in a minute. But prior to doing that, I was running the Public Defender's Office in Savannah, Georgia. I am not a researcher or academic by background. I'm a lawyer. And for about 12 or 13 years or so, I was in private practice doing criminal defense work in Savannah. And then in 2004, 2005, the state of Georgia created a statewide public defender system. And I was involved in that process and involved in setting up the system and establishing some of the offices in areas that didn't have offices, such as, surprisingly to a lot of people, Savannah being a relatively urban, larger area in the state. Not to have a self-standing office is oftentimes kind of surprising. In any event, I was running that office, and in 2007, 2008, I formed, through just a series of interesting circumstances, formed a partnership with Sheffield Hallam University, which has a strong clinic-based program, very practical knowledge, clinic-based programs across the law spectrum and across criminology, but at the time particularly across law. So we created a partnership with the law center there to have interns, student interns in the office every summer for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It would just sort of depend on the needs or the abilities of the students. And so that just developed over the years. I would go over to Sheffield and spend a long weekend to a week to 2 weeks doing some workshops and lecturing and things of this nature. And then the students would come over and spend time with us. And again, that just gradually developed, and we would do a few more things here and a few more things there, and go back and forth. And then a few years back, the Department of Law and Criminology decided to launch the Helena Kennedy Center for International Justice. The idea behind which was to create a house, really, for all these various different clinical programs and for the research programs that were going on within the department, to sort of bring them into a unified space. And of course, to provide additional support and visibility of those programs. And the head of the department, Satal Dillon, asked if I would be interested in coming over for the launch of that event, along with other international partners that had been created and developed over the years with the department. just to be a part of the event. And I did. And during the course of that time there, we started talking about some opportunities to maybe look at wider, broader partnerships to do a bit more than we were just doing with the summer interns. And I was very intrigued with doing that. Still at this point, of course, working in the public defender's office and running that office in Savannah. But the other thing that happened on that visit was that I met David Best. And David was relatively recent himself to Sheffield Hallam at the time. I don't remember exactly how long David had been there at that point, but it had been a matter of months. David's from Scotland. Worked in England and in the UK for a number of years, went to Australia and taught at Monash University for quite a number of years, the associate professor there, then came back to the UK and is the professor of criminology in the Department of Law and Criminology. And during the course of that visit, meeting David and talking with David about the research that he was doing around recovery and assistance, I was just hearing all of these things that I had been struggling with and really finding to be extremely challenging in my work for years and years and years. The issues of not having appropriate resources and support for people who were in recovery, whether they were in recovery from drug and alcohol abuse, whether they were in mental health recovery, whether they were attempting to desist from crime, they were in recovery from criminal behavior, if you will. It really, across the spectrum, the stories and the issues, were quite similar. And I was just absolutely fascinated with the work that David was doing. And, I said at that time, somehow, some way, I want to find an opportunity to do some work, with David. There are just so many opportunities here to address the very issues that we have with our clients day in and day out. And that just grew over time. And ultimately, the past academic year, I was honored to have the opportunity to go over as a visiting lecturer for a year, and I did that. And then during the course of that year, got extremely involved with the research programs that David oversees, and that led to me having a permanent post offered, which I took up. And so I'm there now. I do work on both sides of the department, both in the law and criminology side of the department, but the vast amount of my time is spent working in the research areas that David is overseeing in recovery.
How do you see the addiction problem in England versus the addiction problem here in the States?
I think the addiction problem is probably very similar no matter where you go. What the substances are may be slightly different. Certainly there are cultural differences and societal differences, resource differences. But at the end of the day, the problem that we encounter over and over with people dealing with addiction issues, and the issue that we over and over are trying to help them to overcome is a disconnectedness, a lack of connection. Yes. However they get to where they get in whatever their substance or whatever their issue, the real fundamental issue that we're trying to help them to address is, how do we get you reconnected with your community? How do we help you to have the stigma removed that's keeping you from reconnecting and reintegrating into your community so that you can move forward living meaningful, valuable lives, and so that you can then in turn return those benefits and values that you've received from the community back into the community?
Well, that's what we do here at Treatment Partners of America. We believe in that. And, we do one-on-one therapy 5 days a week here. And we find that that's really the changing factor to bring somebody to that stage where they can become sober and reintroducing them back into society and having a great life and looking back on it and say, listen, I want to help others now. Mm-hmm. And that's what we try to teach. I know for ourselves, that's the way we live every day. And that's a big part of our program here. And I'm not sure how they do it in England, but I would hope they follow the same process.
Yeah. The one-on-one therapy is so crucial because you talked about that disconnect and you talk about reconnecting, reintegrating. Well, that's what the one-on-one therapy every day does. It helps that client who may have been disconnected for months or years from their family and friends get to connect with somebody once again. That therapist becomes a crucial member in that system to reconnect again. And from that, we hope they go from the relationship with the therapist out to the relationship in the community, back to their families and the reintegration. So that is spot on what you said, trying to help clients get reintegrated into life again.
Well, that's exactly what the goal is in a lot of the work that we're doing. And of course, we're on the research side. So we're trying to ascertain what does work and how we can most effectively accomplish these goals. And then, of course, people that like you guys and John and all the people that we've met here in South Florida are doing that work with the clients. So we recognize and we appreciate the fact that when individuals have the opportunities that you're describing, there are fabulous chances for this bonding capital and really kind of reconnecting and getting strong again and pulling together some of the pieces that have been lost over the years. But the second part of that, and the part that is so also critical, we believe to recovery success, is then developing the bridging capital to take those same strengths outside back into the community, just as you were just describing. So it's really two parts, and those are a lot of the things that as John knows, that we look at: the bonding capital and how that's developed and strengthened, and then the bridging capital, how that's developed and how that's strengthened, and what are the strengths that are being developed at one stage that then lead to benefits and strengths at the next stage in the process.
Right. A very good example of that is our clients come in here on day one, timid, shy, isolating, withdrawing, and when they're here 30 days, 60 days, if they have that opportunity, all of a sudden they come out of their shell. They become more of who they are. But you're exactly right. How do we then translate that? Because many of them will do wonderful in treatment, 30, 60, 90 days. And like within a week, they're drinking and drugging again because they couldn't make that bridge, that connection. And that is so crucial. And I love when research and clinical application come together. That's beautiful.
Listen, if anybody has any questions out there for any of our guests or Dr. Joe or myself, please send it over to us. And we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back, and we'll take some of your questions.
Welcome to Treatment Partners of America, your partner in recovery. Treatment Partners of America is a unique, state-of-the-art substance abuse facility. Our trained professionals first focus on finding the core issues in trauma that lead to addiction, with some of the best doctors, nurses, and behavioral health techs the industry has to offer. We offer personalized one-on-one therapy 5 days a week, raising the bar to a higher level of standards. Whether it's drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, gambling, sex and love addiction, or even relationship addiction, Treatment Partners of America has specialists to treat and to help heal your addiction long-term rather than attempt a temporary 30-day quick fix.
Okay, great. We are getting a few questions out there, so let's see who we have. The first one is Carol in Wisconsin wants to know, during your research, this I guess towards Michael, during your research, what factors contribute to the long-term success in recovery?
It's a great question. We've been doing a lot of research around that, and there is a strong evidence base around the answer to that question. And what we find is resilience is predicted oftentimes in large part on various different natures of aftercare, and I use that term in sort of what sounds like the clinical sense, but I don't mean it necessarily in that way. That is, those things that continue on, as we were talking about, that people are able to develop through that bridging capital. It is the connections with the community. It is ongoing peer support. It's employment. It's housing opportunities. The various different well-being measures that we've been looking at in the research are those domains that give the greatest opportunity moving forward. Changing a network from a network that is supportive of addictive behaviors to pro-social networks that are supportive of non-addictive pro-social behaviors is really what comes up over and over and over. We've seen a lot of research, for example, with people who just get away from their using friends, but then they don't develop a new positive network of people. They may no longer be using on certain measures. They may look like they're doing okay, but in terms of well-being and resilience, they are falling or on the verge of falling off the cliff all the time because they haven't substituted those negative networks with pro-social positive networks.
We tell everyone that when you come into treatment, your old contacts in your cell phone, get rid of them. There's very few people that are your real friends. You have your family and a few good friends. Your drug dealer, get that number out of there. And that's what people need to be reprogrammed to actually do. You have to be at that stage in your life, and correct me if I'm wrong, where you're ready to move forward and start that new chapter in your life and say, listen, you know what? That was then. This is now. Mm-hmm. This is who I am now. They put me on a right path. Let me follow that path.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the core components of the NAR quality standard for recovery residents is at all 4 levels.
Can you explain what NAR is, John, for
Sure,
people that are watching
sure.
this right now? They're not that familiar with
Yes.
NAR.
So the synopsis version is that NAR is the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, and its most important function is to set standards for the operation of a recovery residence so that providers that are making referral to a recovery residence.
And a recovery residence, to a lot of people, might call it a halfway house.
Well, they might call it
or
a
sober home, halfway house. But that's basically the slang term that's out there. It's recovery residence.
Right. And so what activities are and what policies and procedures and protocols are in place at that recovery residence that actually promote the cohesive peer community, where I'm going to learn how to be one among many in this residential house. And then next is, how do I get engaged in the recovery community in a similar way? So I'm now beginning to expand my horizons with these peers who I'm living with. And then finally, how do I get engaged in the community at large? So it's all great theory, but how do I do it? Because up until this point in my life, what have I done whenever I wanted to actually socialize? I've gotten whatever drug or substance makes me feel comfortable inside. I take that in order, and then what do? I start gravitating towards people that also take those drugs. So I'm not building a pro-social network. I'm building a...
It's like the old misery loves company.
Yeah, exactly. And so a recovery residence... I am a very strong believer in the value of clinical care. I am also a believer that change, behavioral health change, does not take place in a group therapy session or an individual one-on-one session. The change takes place by living this new information in the real world, and it's promoted by living in the company of people that are a little bit further down the road and have been doing this for a little bit longer than I am. And I just model my behaviors after those guys that were exactly like me 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 9 months ago when they arrived. And they have made significant behavioral changes, and their lives are working. So I just start doing what they do. And if I don't, then this isn't the place for me. And so part of the standard is to make certain that the provider doesn't treat individuals as another head to fill the bed. If you aren't participating in their program, then you ought to go live somewhere else. And they ought to be responsible with how they move you out of their program to some other program.
Well, I know what we do, speaking from our own experience. When somebody walks through that front door, we assess that person as an individual, and we basically tailor that program, our program, to their needs. So if somebody comes through and they need more 12-step, then the next person might say, I'm not a 12-step person. I don't have those beliefs. I need something a little different. I'm a little more spiritual. We'll tailor the whole program just to their needs.
Yeah.
And we find it works much greater in our recovery rate than just putting somebody through and saying, this is the way the program is. You can't run a program like that. Everybody's an individual. We all have different needs.
There are many pathways, and so
Absolutely.
assessment and support of those multiple pathways is absolutely necessary.
Smart recovery is an excellent alternative
Yes.
to those that don't like the religious, quote, aspect of Alcoholics Anonymous. Smart recovery is a rational emotive behavior-based program started many years ago by Albert Ellis and now running under the headline of Smart Recovery, which has meetings all over the country.
Right.
And those help people change their thinking, change their beliefs, and change their behavior, which has to happen with any recovering person.
Well, that's absolutely right. We see a great deal in the research too, and talk a great deal about the benefits. You were asking earlier about, what are some markers of success. Mutual aid makes a huge difference. But what we talk oftentimes with people about is that it's really, you don't have to get yourself bogged down into the debate about whether it should be this group, or is this the right group or the wrong group. It doesn't matter. The benefits of the group is the group, and where you are in your recovery pathway, in your recovery journey, where you are in your own personal experience, that will help to direct you toward the appropriate group for you. But what is key is the group, not the name of the group, and not even necessarily every stated value of the group, because there may be some things about being a part of this particular group that don't fit you naturally. But being a member of the group in and of itself creates that value and begins to build that recovery capital that you need to develop the resilience, to have lifelong positive experiences that will move you forward on the pathway. And it is a pathway, and it is nonlinear, and it doesn't, there aren't graduation dates, and we don't just move to this point and then this is done and then we move on to something else. It's a gradual process, and it goes back and forth. And so people find, the reason that we, in the research, we look at various different pathways is because what we see generally is that people try a lot of different things until they find that thing that really helps get them over that last hurdle. But all of those other things that they may have done along the way weren't failures. They weren't meaningless. They were building blocks to find the thing that helped them succeed.
It's a growing process.
Absolutely.
And that brings me to a question we just received here from area code 321. Asked, how many times do you recommend going into treatment? That's kind of a loaded question, actually, area code 321. My answer personally would be as many times as it takes.
Yeah. I was impressed with a study I read about 20 years ago about smoking. And the results of this long-term research study showed that people who continued to attempt to quit smoking cigarettes eventually succeeded.
In a report to Congress several years back, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, said that the average length of time, research shows that the average number of treatment episodes in order to achieve sustainable recovery is 5.5. So, do people pick up one white chip in a 12-step meeting, never going to treatment, and stay sober for 40 years? Yes. And do people go to a smart recovery meeting without going to treatment and get sober and stay sober? Yes. Does natural recovery take place where I just wake up one morning and say enough is enough and I'm not going to drink or drug anymore, and I don't, and I never do until the day I die? Yes. But what we know is that we've got 23.5 million people out there that are in need of specialty treatment, and only about 2.5 million are accessing that treatment every year. And we also know that because this has become such a lopsided, skewed process towards the opiate addiction and the crisis, that it's not like alcohol where, I could die from drinking, but it was going to take me a little while to get there. We've got 16-year-olds and 14-year-olds and 18-year-olds that are dying right, left, and center. In Palm Beach County alone, this year, in 2016, there were over 4,000 first responder saves using Narcan. If they hadn't been provisioned and if they didn't have the training, that would mean that a significant portion of those 4,000 people that they administered Narcan to would have died from an overdose. Imagine if Palm Beach County had 4,000 deaths.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
And we had over 400.
Wow, that's an eye opener.
So the answer to the question, I think, for area code 321 is as many times as it takes. It's not about trying to get it. It's not an acute care model. There are individuals that will require multiple episodes of care.
It's not a quick fix.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not. It's not a quick fix. We have another question here from John in South Florida. Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel for members of the treatment industry in Florida who are trying to do the right thing with all the wrongdoing going on by others?
That's a great question. and yeah, I do see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I do not want to falsely inspire hope that it's going to take place sometime in the next few months. I think that by the end of 2017, there will have been a significant change in a number of different factors that have contributed to the fraudulent activity that has taken place up to this point. And one of them, of course, is the arresting of participants for patient brokering. Another is the insurance fraud aspect of this is being addressed in a number of different ways, particularly here in Florida. And I think we're going to see federal action before the end of this year that will scare away this population of opportunist predators from our state and perhaps from all states. And I also think that the family members and the consumer themselves are starting to stand up and say enough is enough. And you, the state, you, the provider group, everybody has a responsibility to do whatever it takes to clean this up, because how does a family member know which is one of the good guys and which one is one of the ones that are providing really substandard care and are only interested in being able to bill for your analysis?
And the families often don't have that information.
Sure.
They don't. We always try to educate the families from day one because they're in the dark. You know, you send your loved one to treatment, they're going for 30, 60, 90 days. You don't even know the name of the person's counselor half of these places. And I know from our experience, we take care of that on day one. And we make sure the family's well educated on our whole program. Whether we send them a welcome pack to the family, and we make sure that the therapist is always in contact with the family, and our case workers are weekly with updates.
Yeah, that's great.
Because no one wants to be in the dark and worry about what's going on and worrying if somebody's being taken care of properly or mistreated. You really need to know what's happening.
One of the things that Michael and David have built into the RECAP, the research project, and the instrument. So the RECAP stands for Recovery Capital, and it is an approach to measurement or assessment of strength-based components as opposed to deficits. So traditionally in our treatment space, we've been measuring and pathologizing individuals, right? You know, well, what's wrong with you? Well, let's make a list. And this approach is a strength-based approach. What's right with you? What strengths do you have to apply to certain barriers and to achieve goals that will support your recovery? So a lot of science has gone into this, and this evidence and this research project that FARR and the University Sheffield Hallam University are engaged in is to evidence the outcomes for the individuals. So what did I start with? What recovery capital did I start with when I arrived? And what actions have been implemented? And how have those actions resulted in increased recovery capital? And we've been very fortunate. We expected when we started this research project to have 300 participating residents, and we ended up with 630
That's
out of
great.
this aid program. And now we're getting ready to move on to the second phase of this. So imagine if mom has the ability to see the longitudinal path of juniors of her son or daughter's increase in recovery capital over time, so that mom begins to feel that some evidence-based practice has been applied to determine this, and therefore there's hope.
Yes.
You know, because I can tell you, I take the calls from lots of moms who have lost their son and their daughter, and there's no hope left. And they had been promised all sorts of stuff by the providers that were caring for their child, and they thought everything was going well. And so an evidence-based measurement of the internal and external resources that are available to this person as they continue their recovery journey. It begins in clinical care. This RECAP could be implemented in Treatment Partners of America, and then it can be carried over to the recovery residence or the recovery community center when they exit the 60, 90, or 120 days worth of treatment. And they can then, when they're out of the entire service continuum, when they're gone from the recovery residence, it travels with the individual, and they can continue to conduct assessments as well as to use the goal setting and goal achievement process to improve and enhance their recovery. We're very excited by this.
Yeah, we've known for years in psychology, at least several decades, that strength-based counseling has always been more effective. And why we haven't applied it in this field is an interesting thought that I'm getting right now. I think because our addicted population that comes in has so many deficits, so glaring, it's like, all right, let's see what's going on. And we start out with the negative right away. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with your family? And your research is really going to help us bring the strength-based portion back into our counseling and our treatment program.
Well, that's the goal. And I think sadly what that speaks to is the fact that even within the community of care, we've sort of gotten sucked into that whole stigma approach to addressing these issues that we're trying so hard, of course, to remove and to address. But I think there's something powerful about recognizing the fact that so often people have so many different deficits to approach that even the carer, their first reaction to that is, well, basically, directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously, let's continue the stigmatization by spending all this time. And David tells this great story about working in the Maudsley Hospital in South London, where for hours upon hours, day after day, you have people come in and let's talk about your terrible family. Let's talk about your terrible job if you have one. Let's talk about your terrible health. Let's talk about your horrible housing conditions if you're living in a house. Let's talk about your failures in this respect and in that respect and this respect and that and take up the entire session of time with these folks, and then say, okay, so now let's do something great now, right? And what a horrible way to establish a therapeutic alliance, isn't it? And so the evidence suggests that doesn't work. Yes. And so turning from a focus on pathologies to a focus on strengths makes a great deal of sense. And to return to your comment earlier about the family, I think it's really important for us to remember that we've already talked a bit about community, and we've been talking about recovery capital. Well, theoretically, it might not always be the case, but theoretically, your first community and your first source of recovery capital or personal capital is your family.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But where that is the case, I think it's a real miss not to take advantage of that very critical first community, first source of capital. So I'm really pleased that you take that seriously in your programs, because how can we overlook that?
That's right. True. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in 1 minute. Okay, welcome back to the show. We have Michael Edwards here and John Lehman, and we're talking about the recovery process here in the States and the recovery process also in England, and all the research that Michael's doing in England. We were just talking about how hand in hand it goes, the recovery process, the research, and the aftercare, the whole treatment process. it really does go hand in hand because you need to be aware of what's going on with recovery.
I think that's absolutely right. There's been a big movement in the research community. I know internationally, but specifically in Europe and in the UK. Ethical research is researching with, not on. And I think that ties in perfectly to recovery research. We're not researching on communities or on individuals. We're researching with communities and with individuals. And if we're not, then we really can't effectively gather the data that we need to gather. There are so many, and we've been talking a lot about this for the last couple of days since I've been here with John, and we've been doing the training that we've been doing. We've been talking a lot about measurements and how, of course, we measure success and what are the domains that are important to us. But what we come back to over and over and over, of course, is, well, it's unique to the individual, and there are markers. There are certain things that can develop some predictive value and quality if we have sufficient data to begin to do that. There's an evidence base around that, but it's about the individual. No two recovery journeys are the same. No two sort of banks of personal capital and recovery capital look exactly the same. There are definitely domains. There are definitely measurements that can be taken. There are certainly values. There is certainly value in having that information in a big, broad, sort of corporate sense, a collective sense. But that individual journey still has to be understood as the individual's journey. And a lot of our research, for example, not to go to research heavy on it, but a lot of our research is mixed methods research for a reason. It's important for us to have the quantitative information, the numbers, the hard data that we can look at this number versus that number. But we do an enormous amount of qualitative research where we actually are sitting down with people and collecting stories and collecting experiences from some people so that we can know, well, what does this mean when we translate it to the numbers, or vice versa, looking at it either way. And so we are not doing a lot of the research that I was familiar with before getting involved in the research community, or at least that I thought with people sitting at computers and reading a lot of graphs and articles and typing things. We're in the field with people. We're in the therapeutic communities where the clients are that we're interested in knowing about. We do a lot of work in the community at Sheffield Hallam, and we take that very seriously. We feel that we can't effectively conduct research if we are not effectively in the community in which that research is going on. We believe it's an issue of social justice. Recovery is an issue of social justice. And the first way for us to address the stigma around addiction issues, the first way for us to address the challenges that vulnerable populations of people have, is to get into those populations and put our money where our mouth is. And if we want to have the integrity, and if we want to have the credibility with the individuals who have the information that we need, then we need to demonstrate to them that we care about what it is that they're experiencing on a real human level. That's what it's about. If we're not doing it that way, and then we come and talk to you guys about the fact, well, this is about developing community, well, who's going to listen to that? We've got to be out there doing the work.
Yeah, it's sort of like doing sterile research in a closed laboratory,
And there's a value in that, and there's a purpose and a place for that. I don't deny that, but we're talking about the way people's lives interact and connect, and the way they have lived experiences, and that's a different thing from a lot of the research that we've seen in the past.
We have one question here from Melanie516. She said, you mentioned substance abuse overseas versus substance abuse here in the States, that it's different. What's the difference? I guess she's pertaining to the choice of drugs. That's what it sounds like here.
Yeah, maybe so. If I indicated that I thought it was different, I'm not so sure that honestly it is. There are, as we did say, there are some societal differences and cultural differences and things of that nature. I mean, for example, for a long time, I don't know that this would be true anymore, but for a long time, drug choice was quite different in different places. I mean, people know about the long time extreme challenge that the UK faced with heroin addiction. I mean, it was it continues to be, but it was a real challenge to the country for quite a long time.
Went back to the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, well, but now we see that as prevalently in a lot of places in the States, much more so than I think in the past. So there are some differences I think in common drugs of abuse, but I don't know that it's substantially so. I think the real differences really are what's happening within the policy communities and what's happening within the treatment communities in different places. And the interesting thing about the work that we're doing, again, another interesting thing about the work that we're doing at Sheffield Hallam is we get to see what's happening in so many different places. The European continent, very much like the individual 50 states, are quite different. I mean, you go from place to place, and the policies and the societal sort of responses, the cultural differences are very vast.
Even the laws.
And thus, right, exactly, the laws and right down the line. So I wouldn't suggest that the differences are so great between, say, for example, the drugs being used, but there are some fairly substantial differences in where different places are in terms of policy. Take any two countries and compare them, and you can see a great deal of difference, I suspect.
I think the ideology and the pathology of addiction is the same everywhere.
Yeah.
What happens within the individual.
We on Friday last week, I received an email from Dr. Best over in England that I was copied on. Where he is in communication with the head of the substance use agency in Finland, and they're interested in implementation of the RECAP instrument, and he's connecting the Finns with me because we've developed the software solution to provide this instrument online. And I marvel at this opportunity to expand our horizons, but it also brings in incredible challenges. Have you looked at the Finnish language? Yeah,
No.
I mean, they got their own alphabet. The translation and the manuals and what have you will be quite a challenge to develop. But the point of the story is that the underlying core is the same. As David referenced earlier, we're disconnected, and we are convinced when we arrive, no matter how we present ourselves, we are convinced, as Groucho Marx once said, that I wouldn't want to belong to any club that would have me as a member. So our valuation of ourselves is as low as it can be. And every individual has a different way of masking that and coping mechanisms to deal with that. We've got to help them achieve that sense of self and then begin to build on that. And it requires clinical care, trauma-informed care, and often it requires medication-assisted treatment, not just Suboxone or the controversial elements, but psychotropics. And 70% of all the individuals, or at least one study says that 70% of all those that have a substance use disorder and require specialty treatment also have a co-occurring mental condition. Whether that's true or not, it's in that range.
Sure.
So there's a lot of need for accurate assessment and then the delivery of services to set someone up to succeed. And then there is a need for recovery support services outside of the clinical world to scaffold them as they begin to develop the recovery management skills that are necessary to sustain resiliency. And simply sending them, and I'm a 12-step guy, and I rode that horse into recovery, and I love that horse, and I wouldn't want to change it. That said, simply sending somebody to a mutual aid, whether it's Smart Recovery or it's 12-step or it's Celebrate Recovery or whatever the mechanism, and wishing them a good future life, is not assertively linking them and getting them connected into these pro-social networks. We have to go farther.
The continuum of care is what we talk about.
And so recovery residences are one of those mechanisms for the continuum of care. And what our state here, Florida, has recognized is just that. When they pass this voluntary certification of recovery residences statute, it leads off by saying we recognize that standard-based recovery residences are an essential component in the continuum of care. Therefore, we as a legislature are going to restrict licensed behavioral health care providers from making referral to any program that has not achieved certification. You want to be a housing provider, a landlord, you can go do that. You don't need to be certified. But you want to be considered a member in the continuum of care, you need to go get certified.
And that's the right way to do it.
With standards.
That's the right way to do it. Let's set the bar high.
Yes.
And that's the way it should be. Well, I want to thank both of you for being here today. John Lehman from FARR and Michael Edwards from Sheffield Holland. If anybody wants any more information on either one of these gentlemen's organizations, we're going to post it up on the site. Please contact them for more information. And we want to thank you again. You've both been sober smashed.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Great show, guys.
Terrific. Thank you.
Excellent.